What's up guys, I'm Nico of CAMCRUNCH, and today I'm going to be talking about depth of field. Now, depth of field is basically how much of your image is in acceptable focus. When you have an image where a lot of your image is in focus, let's say a landscape, or basically anything where, all the details are nice and crisp and clear, you have what is called a deep depth of field or a large depth of field. When you have a picture like a portrait where the eyes are in focus and the ears and the nose and everything else is out of focus, where basically you have very little in focus, you have what is called a small depth of field or a shallow depth of field. There are three things that control your depth of field, and the first one is something that everyone probably already knows, and that is your aperture. But there are two other things that control your depth of field. There is your focal length and the camera's distance from the subject. And these three things all work together to determine how much of your image is in focus. Rather than showing you a bunch of pictures that illustrate the differences between changes in the three things that affect your depth of field, I thought I'd show you a video so that you can see the changes as they are happening as I make changes to the camera settings in terms of aperture, distance from the subject, as well as the focal length. So here it goes. The first test we're going to do is with the aperture. Now with the aperture, the larger your aperture is, or the smaller your f-stop number is, the more shallow your depth of field is, so less will be in focus. And when you increase the f-stop number or decrease the size of your aperture, let's say to f8, f11, or f16, you will get a deeper depth of field, so more of your image will be in focus. Right now, we have our aperture set at 1.8, and you can see that there are film canisters set in front of me, and the focus is on this one in the middle. So the depth of field is very shallow at this point. The film canister to the front of it and behind it are out of focus, and even more so with the film canisters at the end. But what I'm going to do is change the aperture, and as I change it, you will see that more of the image will get in focus. So I'm going to lower the aperture size or increase the f-stop number. Right now, again, it's at 1.8, and I'm going to slowly move it. So now it's at 2.2. Now it's at 5.6, and as you can see, this back one here is clearing up, as well as this front one here. Now it's at f7.1, f9, f11, and now it's at f16. And as you can see, these two here are pretty much clear and in focus now, while these ones are still slightly out of focus, but they're more so in focus than they were previously. I'll push it a little bit further all the way to f22, and as you can see, it's very clear now. So again, the smaller your aperture size is, or the larger f-stop number, gives you a larger or deeper depth of field, while a smaller f-stop number like f1.8, f2.8, basically a bigger aperture size will give you a more shallow depth of field. So the next thing that affects your depth of field is how far the subject is away from the camera. And right now we have a film canister that is really up close to the camera. And as you can see, we are shooting at f4, but everything behind the camera, behind the film canister, is pretty much out of focus. So you don't really need a very large aperture to create out of focus areas. All you have to do is just move closer to your subject, which explains why when you are shooting a landscape, even though you shoot at f2.8, let's say, you will get pretty much the whole thing clear. It's because you're focusing into infinity. So I'll show you that effect right now. So as of right now, we pretty much just have this film canister in focus. I'm going to move the tripod back. I'm going to recompose, and then I'm going to focus in on the film canisters. And we have the same aperture, but pretty much all the film canisters are in focus now, rather than that just one in the front. And again, I'm going to move back close, recompose, and focus in. And now that I've focused in on this object that's very close to the camera, everything behind it is pretty much out of focus. The last thing that affects your depth of field is your focal length. The longer your focal length is, the more out of focus areas you will get, the shallower your depth of field will be. With a wider focal length, you will have a larger depth of field. And that's assuming your aperture stays the same and the distance from the subject stays the same. So right now, again, we are looking at the film canisters, and we are focused on this second one right here. And pretty much everything besides the second canister is out of focus. So what I'm going to do is place my hand right here. And as you can see, it's very, very out of focus. But I have a zoom lens on. Right now it's at 105. But as I zoom it out to 24, you will see how clear my hand becomes. And that's because I moved from a longer focal length to a wider focal length, even if I left all the other settings the same. So again, I'll move that in. And as you can see, my hand is pretty much completely blurred out. But when I move to a wider focal length, my hand becomes clear. So again, the longer your focal length is, or the narrower your field of view is, the more shallow your depth of field will be. Whereas if you have a wide focal length, your depth of field will be greater, will be deeper, and more will be in focus. So those are the three things that affect your depth of field. But I'm just going to throw in one more thing into the equation, and that is your sensor size. Now, the sensor size doesn't actually change your depth of field. Whether you're using a small sensor, a full frame sensor, or medium format sensor, as long as you have the same distance from the subject, the same aperture, and the same focal length, then your depth of field is pretty much the same. But there is a catch. With a smaller sensor, you're seeing less than what you would see with a full frame sensor or a medium format sensor in terms of your view, your frame. So what do I mean by that? Just imagine this. You're taking a picture with a crop camera, a camera with an APS-C size sensor like your Canon Rebels or your D3000 series or 5000 series or 7000 series. You're taking a picture of someone and it's a head and shoulder portrait. If you take a full frame camera with the same distance, same focal length, and same aperture, and you view that subject, you will get more in the frame than you would with a smaller sensor. So how do you compensate for that? Well, in that case, you'd have to move the full frame camera closer to your subject in order to get the same field of view, essentially. So because you're changing the distance from the camera to the subject, you're bringing it closer, your depth of field becomes more shallow, it becomes smaller, and you get more out of focus area. So although depth of field doesn't change between sensor sizes, the cropped view, I guess, of smaller sensors compared to larger sensors does play a role if you try to equalize that between the different sensor sizes. I hope that made sense, and I hope that didn't confuse you too much. If you have any questions regarding that, leave that in the comment box down below and I will reply, maybe make another video just to clear things up. So that's it, guys. Those are the factors that affect your depth of field. I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope it did help. If it did, please give this video a thumbs up, favorite the video, share the video, and subscribe because it will really help out the channel grow. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.